Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending from which part of the world that you are joining us. Welcome to this webinar on business as unusual. It's a webinar in which we will explore how ports will survive and thrive in the post-COVID-19 era. The webinar is organized by IAPH and the Maritime and Trade Division of IHS Markit. My name is Patrick Verhoeven. I'm Managing Director of IAPH, and this morning I'm joined by Jacques van der Meijere, the CEO of Port of Antwerp. Welcome, Jacques. Both of us are really delighted to have you with us in this webinar and in the next webinars that we're organizing over the next months. We will be diving in some of the issues we were planning to share with you in March, previous March, during the World Ports Conference, which was supposed to be held here in Antwerp. And Port of Antwerp was, of course, a fantastic partner in preparing the 2020 edition, and we're sure, Jacques, that you will be, again, one of our wonderful supporters in preparing the next edition in June. So I'm really delighted that you are here with us this morning.
Thank you, Patrick. The Port of Antwerp is indeed proud to be at the forefront of the World Port Conference. Obviously, I had hopes to deliver these remarks in person from the stage here in this iconic building, where we would have held in March of this year our gala dinner, but the pandemic had other ideas for all of us. But I'm inviting you to come to Antwerp next year to this splendid neo-Gothic building where the first regulated stock exchange was incorporated in 1531. Well, COVID-19 has, since the outbreak, learned us many lessons in our space. The most important one is that the ports are more than ever essential as hubs in the global trade and has increased their visibility.
You're absolutely right, Jacques. It's indeed one major conclusion from this crisis is the essential role of ports and supply chains and the shipping community, and of course also all the people that work in this industry. As an organization, we've been very active on that front during the past weeks and months in trying to stimulate collaboration, exchange of ideas, guidance. We're also keeping a weekly economic impact barometer, which we track really how the industry is doing. And of course also these webinars are part of that exercise of bringing the global ports community together and working together on solutions, because the world will look indeed very different once we're really getting out of this crisis.
Well, it's indeed a great initiative, Patrick. It's, in my opinion, one of the small steps that will lead us to that new normal that will be fundamentally different than the one we've experienced till now. And the webinar of today is very interesting. I believe this will bring us more than ever in the business as unusual for all of us.
Thank you, Jacques. We're really looking forward to this first webinar. It's indeed the first one in a series of 9. There will be 2 more this summer, one on the 10th of June and one on the 1st of July. And then we continue in fall with another series of 3, and there will be the 3 last ones will be early spring, running up all the way until we're back in Antwerp for the World Ports Conference, as I said, 23 to the 25th of June. Mark it already in your calendar today. So thank you, Jacques, for the opportunity of working again with you. We really look forward to that. And let's get on with the show now.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. As Patrick Verhoeven said, depending on from where in the world that you're joining us. My name is Peter Terschwell. I'm Vice President in the Maritime and Trade Division of IHS Markit, and it is our great honor and privilege to be a partner with Patrick and with IAPH and with the Port of Antwerp in organizing what was to have been the 2020 World Ports Conference this past March, but will now be the 2021 World Ports Conference next June. hopefully when we are all able to get back together again in person, and we have largely left this crisis behind us, but to be determined in some ways because we're still very much in the middle of it. I am joined today by three distinguished individuals who are going to be able to share their deep insights into what is happening right now from a port's perspective, and perhaps more importantly, where we're headed. Because the world has fundamentally changed as a result of the pandemic that we are still in the midst of. What the world is going to look like in the future is going to be different. Ports are going to have to adjust. There's no question about that. How they will adjust, what will be the best paths forward, what will work, what will not work, what will the environment be, how will ports need to interact with their various stakeholders? Those are all subjects that we're going to explore on this webcast today. So I want to introduce our three speakers. First, Jean Soroka. Jean, nice to see you. Jean is for those of you who do not know him, is the executive director of the Port of Los Angeles. Jean comes out of the steamship industry. He ran APL in North America and has been doing a great job at the Port of Los Angeles. Jean, I noticed that you were just named as if I understood it correctly, what is essentially the chief logistics officer for the city of Los Angeles, obviously indicating that you have gained the support of the mayor of Los Angeles in all of your efforts to respond to the COVID-19 crisis in your region. So, Jean, thank you very much for joining us. And then the two other gentlemen who are here with me, Jan Hoffman and Theo Notteboom, the three of us were to be together in Antwerp in March, and we never really got that opportunity. So I'm glad that we can be together here, and then we can explore together some of the issues that I was mentioning just a moment ago. Jan is the chief of the logistics branch, the trade logistics branch at UNCTAD, which stands for the UN Conference on Trade and Development, based in Geneva. Jan, welcome. Glad to be with you. Theo is arguably the world's leading academic authority on seaports, and he is a professor in port and maritime economics and management, and with numerous academic affiliations, including Shanghai Maritime University, Ghent University, University of Antwerp, and Theo, you're joining us from Antwerp as well. Before we, really get into the substance, just a quick check-in. How are you guys doing? How are your families doing? How are your colleagues doing? Just, a little flavor for how, you and those closest to you have been weathering this crisis over these past several weeks and months now, really. In Brooklyn here where I am, we've been in, pretty much total lockdown for, the last 8 weeks. And, and I expect that we will be in lockdown now for several weeks going forward. Jean, maybe a quick word from you on that.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. We're all doing well. And through the great leadership of the governor of California, our county supervisors, and the mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, we have done our very best to manage during this once-in-a-lifetime pandemic and economic crisis. Our health is good. We've had minimal problems on that side. And we have extended our safer at home emergency order through the middle of August. So the work will continue here to flatten the curve, curb this illness, and eradicate the virus. And I'll bring you some unique perspective today, as I lived in Shanghai as an expatriate during the SARS epidemic. And we've got some parallels, but this is so much different on many levels.
Indeed, Jean, and we can get into a lot of what you were talking about. Theo, from you, how are things going?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Everything is going very well here. In Belgium, we were quite seriously affected by the crisis, as you might have seen in statistics, but things are easing in terms of the measures that are applicable. What I've noticed personally is that, of course, we're all living in an online world right now, meeting people online, even attending conferences online. And for me personally, this has opened my eyes more to physical interaction with people. So I really miss physical interaction with students, with colleagues, with experts in the field, because this always adds something extra. And I think also when you particularly look at the port area as well, I think we should also appreciate more and more the physical movement of goods, because we've been talking so much about digital transformation in the past number of years that we have sometimes forgotten about the fact that goods need to be moved as well. So I think all the people out there working hard to make sure that these goods physically move and reach us, well, they deserve our attention and deserve our gratitude as well.
Agreed, Theo. And I think that one of the things that this crisis has done is really renewed our appreciation for not just frontline medical workers, who of course have been heroes through this crisis, but others and who are physically moving goods, whether dock workers or truck drivers or people on vessels, which is one of the reasons, to be honest, it's been very distressing to keep hearing about this issue concerning crew changes, where crews are unable to get home to be with their loved ones. New crews are unable to come onto ships. I realize it's somewhat outside the scope of our discussion here, but it just shows you some of the challenges that are really going on right now. Jan, how are things with you?
Yeah, thanks. Personally, very, very good. Lucky where I live, I have space, I have a roof terrace, we are healthy. My 3 sons have their own lives that are healthy, so that's good. And on the work, also, I must say, the UN, the United Nations, we had to respond in 2 ways. One is to keep our own functioning, working, go to video conferences, IT solution, distance, IT support to customs and port and authorities and so on. And that has gone actually remarkably well. And then apart from our own working, especially the area where we are working and my trade logistics branch, we actually have more work now even more work than we normally have, because we are called upon to help our member countries, the port authorities, maritime authorities, customs authorities, ministries of trade, negotiators, see what do I do now in times of COVID? So it's quite a lot, and I'm very proud of my team. We are 20 people all together in the branch, and they are all working from home. And as there doesn't seem to be a weekend, it's like 7 days per week. It's working well so far. Everybody is healthy, and still hoping that what we do will actually help to overcome this crisis.
Great, Jan. Thank you very much. And I think that that's a good transition to get into the first part of our discussion. I mean, one of the things that is quite remarkable to me is, and this is in talking to many people out in the industry over the past several weeks, and this would be, everyone from ocean carriers to freight forwarders to seaports, people really literally across the whole sort of maritime supply chain or maritime industry. And it's astonishing how quickly the transition to virtual working has gone and how smoothly it's gone. Now, obviously, that's for white collar workers like us, who are able to do our works from behind a desk. And that doesn't account for, those who are out in the open moving freight. But in terms of people who are, working at desks, the transition seems to have been remarkably smooth and really very enlightening, because now organizations, not just in this industry, but across all industries, are beginning to realize, wait a second, I can trust my people to get their work done from home. I can trust my people to interact with their families, take care of kids, do everything that they have to do, and maybe even gain time that they would have spent commuting, that kind of thing. So let's just use that as a springboard to get into the discussion of, like, where are we now? Like, let's start even before we start looking towards the future. Let's talk about, here we are now. We're in mid-May. What are you folks seeing in terms of how ports are adjusting to the new reality of lower volumes, the new reality of safety, the new reality of remote work? How is that going? And Jean, from your perspective, you're running the largest container port literally in the Western Hemisphere, and obviously this has been a big adjustment for you, as it has been for every other port. How are you adjusting, Jean? How is it going?
It's been quite challenging, and I think, Peter, number one, this is a public health crisis that we called out many, many months ago. And having lived through something similar to this, a respiratory illness that had no vaccine, I had a certain perspective early on, but this is much more devastating than anything we've ever witnessed in our lifetimes. Here in the largest economy in the world, we have found no way to stop this illness. There are more than 80,000 souls that have been lost, 1.3 million diagnosed cases, and we don't see any slowdown. There is no vaccine. There is no way to get back to any predicted normalcy in our society at this point in time. In the county of Los Angeles, the city, and the state of California, we've done some miraculous work around trying to educate people on what this life must be like, and I think we've done a pretty fair job. For the Port of Los Angeles specifically, we have had two horrible shocks to the supply chain. One were the ill-advised trade policies out of Washington, and second, COVID-19. The knock-on effects of both will be felt for the rest of this year and into 2021. We simply don't have the demand in our economy today to supplant any notion of recovery in our industry for the United States and its major markets. 70% of the U.S. economy is driven by consumer sales, products, and consumption. That simply is not happening today. The County of Los Angeles extended its stay-at-home orders through the middle of August. We will not see the notion of an open and closed economy. It will be a very slow reemergence of the American economy at the national, state, county, and local levels over time. In the end, I believe we will lose 15% of our imports because of the trade policies. But what it gives us is the opportunity to reinvent ourselves. How we go to market, the fact that we will overinvest in our export segment of the business to help this re-emerging economy whenever it takes place, months or calendar quarters from now. We will help American companies get back to the markets overseas that they once enjoyed, and those great partnerships will help them explore new markets. And maybe through all of this, if we have a better balance of trade coming through the Los Angeles gateway, we may have an opportunity to reduce our cost to serve and be more attractive to people who want to participate in the supply chain through Southern California. So there's some huge upside here. That responsibility is on us today. It's going to take large collaboration across a number of stakeholder groups who have not necessarily been aligned in the past. It may take some bold actions, a tremendous amount of financial investment, and a unique look at business where not too many followers have been in our path in recent years. And so with that, I think we're going to have to take a very different look. We've proven we can run this port from a telecommuting standpoint. About half of our staff is at home doing work, having video conference meetings almost hourly. The other half are our police officers and construction crews, and we continue to invest through cycle. We have more than $360 million worth of projects and 3,000 construction members out on our port property every day, continuing to build both visitor serving and industrial sites to make sure as this economy does reemerge, we will have the opportunity to meet that moment head on.
Great, Gene. Thank you very much. And the economic impact that ports are experiencing because of reduced trade flows is in some ways quite staggering. I mean, you mentioned how the hit that U.S. ports took as a result of a U.S. trade policy, particularly towards China, and now you're getting hit again. We heard earlier today on the Maersk earnings call that container volumes in the second quarter of the year are going to drop 25%. The IHS market, our team of economists is currently forecasting at the moment just a 5.4% drop in exports in 2020, but it's going to be entirely possible that number grows. So if we were to turn to Theo, I mean, how do you see ports adjusting to the new reality? Let's talk about safety in just a moment, because Gene, I want to ask you about safety, and I want to ask you, Theo and Jan, about the whole safety scenario here that many ports are dealing with. But just from an overall how are ports all over the world dealing with, this is a body blow that has left none of them unaffected?
Yeah, indeed. If I look at some of the key figures impacting ports, you look at, for example, global container volumes down 8 to 10%. We see particularly a huge drop in the exports out of Asia, 15 to 20% drop to Europe and North America. Exports to Asia are doing quite well, I must say. So the situation is not so disastrous, dramatic as for the imports coming from Asia. Of course, we've seen a lot of blank sailings. About 20% of the network capacity of an average container shipping line is now inactive. We have a lot of idle ships, between 2.5 to 3 million TEU of fleet capacity is now idle. So these are gigantic quantities. And if you look at shipping lines themselves, many of them are turning into survival mode. Maybe in the tanker market, the situation is slightly different, but particularly in container markets and many of the other cargo markets, the situation is not very good. But I also see, and this is also quite remarkable, normal flow patterns are severely disrupted. And it's very interesting to see how many container shipping lines, for example, have come up with programs such as suspension of transit, detention in transit, storage in transit, programs aimed at allowing cargo to stay longer in transit points before being delivered or picked up by the final customer. We've not even talked about the cruise business. The cruise business has basically ceased all activities, a huge blow to many very big cruise ports around the world. And then on the front of the seafarers, you mentioned that already, Peter, based on statistics of International Chamber of Shipping, we see that 150,000 seafarers are in need of crew change by 15th of May, so in a few days. So we have a lot of crew on board of ships needing change very soon, basically also to some extent in a kind of lockdown situation on the ships. So it's a kind of avalanche of things that are hitting the ports at the moment. But what is very remarkable to me is that despite this combination of huge dramatic events, the ports and basically the whole supply chains are still working quite well. Then there have not been many disruptions. We are doing a weekly survey for IAPH on the impact of COVID-19 on the world ports. And one of the things that's very striking is that, for example, only few ports refer to shortages of dock workers or shortages of truck drivers. So it seems that despite all these limits that we have right now, also in terms of how to perform work, things are going not normal, but close to normal in many ports around the world. And again, that's quite amazing, an amazing achievement, and to be able to line up all those partners in the supply chains to make sure that you can still get the moves going.
That's indeed the case. I mean, certainly in the U.S., we've seen virtually no shutdowns. The Port of Houston, for possibly 24 hours, they had a case of somebody who had tested positive, one of the dock workers. They immediately addressed the situation, and they were back in business very, very quickly. It certainly showed the urgency and the recognition of ports as critical components of the supply chain. And so, and Gene, I was talking to Jim McKenna yesterday. Jim McKenna is the head of the employer group that oversees the longshoremen on the U.S. West Coast. And what he was saying is that there have been fewer than 5 positive test cases among dock workers, and there's certainly been no disruption that we've seen on the U.S. West Coast. And so that's I think very positive. And again, it attests to the critical nature of ports. And this was a point that Jacques Vandermeeren had made in the opening video that we're picking up on. Jan, from your perspective, I mean, how do you see the big picture at this point?
Coincidentally, just today, the United Nations launched a quite important statistical report on measuring all the different impacts, social, economic, employment, and so on. So when you asked what's the situation right now, that would be a good moment now if Rupert could pull up this one illustration that I had prepared. And what you will see on that chart is in the so-called nowcast. Rupert, do you hear us? The nowcast is using currently existing data to forecast what will be measured for today and the future. We do not know the trade today. We don't know the trade statistics of today because they will only be reported in weeks or even months. So if you ask me, what's the trade situation right now? Nobody in the world knows. However, we know from previous years and many years and quarters and so on, I have all types of data that I can measure now, including certain prices, consumer behavior, planes and whatever. So based on this forecast, which would have been on the chart, but we can also skip it. I just give you the number and afterwards we send the link on the study. So the second quarter 2020, global trade will be down 27%. So minus 27% would be it's not a forecast because it's now, but we don't know what is happening now, so that's why we call it a nowcast. No? So I think that's an interesting number. It's really bad. It's really bad. That's in terms of trade value. And I don't know in terms of tons or TPU. So in terms of how the ports are doing, just one note on this. I agree with what you and colleagues had said. I think ports are really doing a good job. The basic business model in most ports in the world, which are mostly PPPs, there's a good collaboration, there's a public sector involved, there's commercial interest, and we realize that the ports, they work. If there's one little thing one could criticize is coming back also what Theo mentioned, the seafarers, the fact that seafarers are stuck on the ships and cannot change and cannot fly home. I'm not sure if all port workers are really as solidary as they could and should be with their colleagues on the ships. Because we have seen guidelines and applied procedures in some ports that say to protect my dock workers, I will not allow the seafarers to leave the ship. So that would be one little suggestion. But otherwise, yes, I think it's an important data that it was launched today, minus 27% in trade in second quarter 2020.
No, indeed, it's staggering, and the chart that you put up is, we're seeing that chart appear in many different scenarios, things bumping along, and then absolutely plunging to unprecedented levels, or going up in the other direction, and which is equally horrifying related to things like unemployment. When we talk about ports' ability to function effectively, just like all workplaces, whether manufacturing plants or even offices, it's going to depend on the ability for workers to be in workplaces in a safe environment. And whether that's social distancing within offices or the very, very special and unique challenges that ports face in keeping port workers safe while they are on the job. And Gene, I had mentioned just a moment ago, it was gratifying to hear from Jim McKenna of the PMA that A, that there's been no disruption, but B, that the workers have remained relatively healthy through this crisis. Can you give us an idea of what you are doing to ensure that your workforce remains safe? Because obviously that is a precondition for your port being able to operate.
Yeah, you're right, Peter, and this is so important, but it did not come easy. And I would like to thank International Longshore President Willie Adams and Jim McKenna for the work that they did to get coast-wide rules on safety for our workers during this unprecedented pandemic. There were meeting after meeting discussions with leadership on both sides to make sure that we had a plan through all 29 ports up and down the west coast of the Pacific. In particular, early on, before we knew a lot about what was happening, we were called by one of our local officials at the ILWU who told us point blank that our terminals do not have the proper cleaning solution and materials to get the longshore men and women feeling safe when they hand off equipment. we immediately jumped into action. And with our partner agency here in Los Angeles, the Department of Water and Power, we secured 700 gallons of industrial bleach that were quickly diluted by our hazmat team, poured into 32-ounce bottles that staff and myself went out to our local home improvement stores to buy, and distributed to all terminals at the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles. Now, this was an effort to bring cleaning solution for the heavy-duty trucks that move our cargo, as well as our communications equipment that are passed from longshore member to longshore member. And all of that happened within hours. But it set the tone for what we wanted to do on the safety front with our workforce on the waterfront. And that extended to truckers and other visitors, including our Los Angeles marine terminal operators, the private sector companies who are on the job every day. An ordinance passed by Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti required all citizens to wear face coverings and, when appropriate, bring the nitrile exam gloves to work. We also distributed that. And part of that job now is really an offshoot of all of that work in February and March, where, as you mentioned at the opening, my responsibility as city's chief logistics officer, concurrently with that of port director, is driving all this personal protective equipment to our frontline medical workers and to our essential workforce, whether you be in a warehouse, driving a truck, or right here on the docks in Los Angeles. And I think that, along with our awareness from the medical experts, whether it be from the World Health Organization, the Centers for Disease Control, Los Angeles County Health Services, we have become a very learned industry about how we must physically distance, how we must interact with people, what we need to do to keep ourselves cleanly, whether it's the washing of the hands, the using of sanitizer. And this was no time to be a hero. If you didn't feel well, stay home. Follow the doctor's recommended orders. If you were symptomatic, seek a medical expert's advice. If you had another illness, same thing. You may be susceptible. So we listened quickly as a society to those medical experts, and we're foregoing a lot. Our longshore work is down about 19% year over year. That impacts every one of our families, our children, our parents we take care of, our education, putting dinner on the table every night. It is very painful, but not as painful as those 80,000 people who have lost their lives. So we must continue to be vigilant and move forward to protect our workforce.
Very good, Gene. And, you know, one of the points that I think that you're bringing out here that is really important. Ports deal with a lot of stakeholders. They're dealing with their customers on the shipping line or the ship owner side. They are dealing with their communities. They're dealing with their workforces. They're dealing with various and sundry other stakeholders. And this is the balancing act of ports, that they're in the middle of an ecosystem, and their success depends on interacting effectively and successfully with key stakeholders. And for you, there's no question, and this is the case for all ports, that your dock workers are a key constituency that you must deal with. Without them, the cargo isn't moving. Without cargo moving, there is no port. So here is an example where what you have done is very sort of proactively managed a relationship with a key stakeholder that to me speaks volumes in terms of providing an example of the environment that ports are operating in being able to successfully manage relationships with key stakeholders, in this case a longshoreman group, but in ports around the world, I'm certain that the management of stakeholder relations has really been up to a completely new level right now.
Yeah, and Peter, it doesn't just start with us here in Los Angeles. It's been conversations with people that I look up to, like Jens Meyer at the Hamburg Port Authority, Pino Mussolino at the Port of Venice, and so many others that I've called on for advice during this troubling time to see where there are best practices and what we can learn from each other.
Yep, I think that's great, Gene. I mean, Theo, turning to you, having watched the and lived through the last big shock to seaports, which was the 2020 2008, 2009 financial crisis, which, is somewhat dwarfed by the crisis we're going through now. But nevertheless, it's the only real example that many people have to look back on. How does this compare to that? Is this new? Is it different? Like if you were to draw that as a comparison.
I find it quite interesting because the financial crisis, which started late 2008, was a kind of unintended collapse of the economic financial system. What we have now is a kind of deliberate action where governments impose lockdown rules, measures on their population for health reasons. So it's a kind of controlled setting. And I think therefore also we see much more optimism on how to get out of this situation, because although this is of course a very serious disease, I think we have more control over how we can get out and how we can then pick up where we left off. I think overall also the 2008-2009 crisis was different in the sense that this was something unexpected at a time when people thought the sky was the limit. The markets were doing very well. There were capacity issues in a lot of ports, shipping lines, shipyards were full, and so on. So there was a very good market situation just prior to the crisis. And so it hit, and it led to a lot of pessimism among people. So people didn't see us getting out of the mess, let's say, at that time. And if I read now, I see a lot of optimism. I see that a lot of people are very, very anxious to work hard to make sure that we can pick up where we left off. And we also, of course, learned from the previous crisis that you have to be resilient, that you have to prepare for sudden shocks. In 2008, 2009, nobody was prepared, basically, on how to deal with such shocks. Another thing which is quite different from 2008, 2009 is that we now have digital tools to help us. In 2008, 2009, there were only limited digital tools. But at the same time, now we are facing with a huge human element in the crisis, which was not there in 2008, 2009. And with the human element, I refer to human interactions and the fact that, for the next couple of months, maybe years, we will have to adopt different ways of interacting with each other. There are also some similarities. We saw a huge fall in the oil prices. Crude oil price has gone down significantly. What I also think is similar is that we will see a fast recovery initially, and then only later on we will see the long-term effects kicking in. So I expect that once we're out of this lockdown situation, that things will improve very fast, but then we might see a slowdown again. What I also expect is that we won't see a lot of mergers and acquisitions taking place. That did also not happen after 2008, 2009. It came much, much later. And I also, when we particularly talk about the shipping industry, just like in 2008, 2009, I don't see any major players in shipping go bankrupt because many of them are too big to fail. And we will see reshuffling taking place in terms of services, in terms maybe of alliances, but I don't think we will see bankruptcy straight away. So in that sense, there are also quite a lot of similarities on the situation we had in 2008, 2009.
Great, thank you, Theo. I want to turn to, in a way, what was the title and the premise of this webcast today, which is adopting port business models to survive and thrive in the post-COVID era. In other words, what does the post-COVID era look like? Now, we're not out of it yet, as Jean mentioned. We're still in lockdown. There are no vaccines that are developed and proven yet. There is no cure. All we have is the ability to flatten the curve and then hesitantly, carefully, very tentatively open up and see how we do in that without provoking another, second wave or that kind of thing. So we're not out of it yet. And so not to diminish in any way the severity of the crisis as it stands here today. And of course, different countries are experiencing it at different levels. Different countries have been much more successful in keeping their infection rate down and so forth. But nevertheless, let's assume that as all pandemics have come and gone in the past, and as massive crises have come and gone in the past, that this too shall pass. And so when it does, what does that future look like? And Jan, maybe you could take an initial stab at that. What do you think the post-COVID environment is going to be, not for the world, of course, in general, but really for the seaport sector?
Yeah. No, when we were preparing for this webinar discussion, we were trying to find moments where we would disagree and entertain the public with some disagreement. But so far, I disagree. I fully agree with Jean and Theo. I think it's an important point made. On the looking out to what does it mean for the ports, and also again, I will still come back to the question: what is different from the financial crisis? Financial crisis was above all for the ports an issue of demand. All of a sudden, there was less demand. Here at this moment, of course, there is now also less demand, but here the main problem is a challenge of supply, that factories are closing down, planes no longer fly, there's no space in the belly for cargo. Trucks are stuck at the border not because of the goods, but because of the truck drivers. So it's really an issue of supply. And then in that sense, sharing somehow this optimism of Theo, a lot of the solutions that we are working on in the port and also in UNCTAD, all the things we have been pushing and promoting, and also why we are now called upon with so much requests for support, all these solutions help to achieve both. They help achieve facilitate trade, trade easier, faster, more transparent, and they should also help protect by dematerializing, by digitalizing, by automating. So specific solutions that we promote and try to help implement: pre-arrival processing, customs automation, risk management, trade information, single window, port code optimization, electronic payments, and I have a long list here. These are very concrete things. And thanks to the crisis, things sounds a bit cruel, but due to the crisis, there's a lot of push now to push these reforms, to invest even more in these reforms, which in the long term, I believe, are good for trade logistics, for trade, and for the seaports. So in that sense, an attempt of a positive outlook without denying all the really horrible current negative impacts, especially on the population and the transport market.
Great. And Jean, going back to you, I mean, clearly, obviously, you're right in the middle of this, in your role at the port and your role as essentially the chief logistics officer for the city of Los Angeles. You live in the here and now. Let's be honest. I don't know how far you have an opportunity or have time to, at the moment, to really think beyond this crisis, because you're so deeply in the middle of it right now. But to the extent that at that very rare quiet moment that you might have, that you're thinking, what does the future look like? What does it look like? What can you tell us in terms of from where we stand today? How is the environment going to be different?
Well, Peter, living in Los Angeles, I still have to drive an automobile, put on some nice jazz music, and that gives me a little bit of time to think. But you're exactly right. We have the here and now, which is a triage situation. And fortunately, while 33 million Americans are out of work, most of our sector in the supply chain is still going on the job every day. So in a small way, we're helping keep the economy moving. So when we do reemerge, we can take off and have a long runway to help the economy start its long recovery process. The second piece is what we're going to do during that reemergence. And I alluded to the fact that we're going to be focusing on American exports, the agriculture sector, automobile, heavy machinery are three things that come to mind right away as far as segment focus to help those companies bring people back to work and reintroduce themselves to the export markets. And then thirdly, I believe that the new economy is going to look very different. Here in California, there will be an emergence of green machinery at our ports and in our trucks, in the automobiles that we drive, and we're going to have to get skilled people around that industry. That means we need to upskill and reskill our workforce. In California, the nation state with 40 million people living here, we have 30% of our working population in the transportation sector today. We're going to need to make sure that those folks and their successors have a pathway to good work in the future as well. And that's going to come through our decarbonization plan. Like many other ports around the world, we're going to try to accelerate that technology. That workforce development will also be a big play. And I have marveled every time I visit the Port of Antwerp and see Jack. The look at that workforce training and development center is a model for all ports to follow around the world. We want to do our best to replicate that and bring folks in, kids as young as 12, 13 years old that need to see what a supply chain opportunity could bring to them. So the new economy is going to look very different. I think we have some ideas and some very progressive people that we're speaking with, but we're going to have to be as nimble as possible to hit the ground running.
Thank you, Gene. Good to hear it. I mean, Theo, when you look out, on many of the subjects that we talk about concerning the port sector, port governance, cooperation among ports, technology development. That's technology has come up a number of times now on our call, and without question, there is a acceleration in technology adoption that is occurring. Having spoken to many logistics technology companies, startups, established players, all of them, even if they are experiencing a sort of temporary lull in business right now, feel huge momentum in the direction of greater technology adoption, greater technology investment, the envelope being pushed in areas like artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, pulling data together through APIs, having data be decision ready, if you will, able to drive decisions rather than being kind of like nice to have data. And so what do you think, Theo, when you look forward, like in terms of these traditional areas that ports deal with? And then I want to ask all you guys about decarbonization, because clearly that figures into the picture here too.
Mm-hmm. Very good. I think overall, also given the volatility in the volumes that we have seen over the last 10, 15 years, ports are challenged to reassess their revenue models and their business models. And I think looking at the green discussion and also looking at digital transformation, these are two areas where ports and port authorities in particular can take up a very important role, but at the same time also can start thinking of how can we add to the existing revenue streams you already have. Particularly in Europe, many ports are landlord ports. That means most of the income or revenues are coming from land leases and also the port use. And I think overall to rely too much on these two for the future is not healthy. So that's why you see also in Europe, but also in other parts of the world, that they are indeed investing. The port authorities are investing in creating new logistic solutions for the hinterland. That they are investing in, for example, new non-fossil fuel-based solutions, green energy. That are investing in digital platforms that can help to create visibility and can help also to optimize supply chains and so on and so on. And I think this is the way forward. And of course, this will depend very much on the governance model you have as a port and also on the scale of the port. But I think even small ports can have a role to play in the digital transformation and also in the greening of the supply chains. So I think these are interesting times, and I think the current crisis will only accelerate these kind of initiatives, simply because of, again, the fact that you cannot rely too much on only volume-based revenues. You should also look at other types of revenues and other types of creating added value for your customers.
Well, it's a very interesting thing that you say, Theo, because ports are not always the best suited organizations to be entrepreneurial. In many cases, they are, quasi-government organizations, and we see that those seaports, if you were to look in North America, those seaports that are the most disconnected from their governments and can function in the most commercially agile way, sometimes are the ones that are the most successful. Mm-hmm. Jan, when we look out to the future in areas like decarbonization, for example, a huge topic that we were discussing. Now we have to reassess it, or we have to at least. We're obviously not reassessing decarbonization; it's a reality. But we have to now look at it in a new context, because you can't just look at it solely as the agenda item that it was. It has to be wrapped up into how we are recovering from the pandemic, how our priorities are going to be reordered. How do you see that issue beginning to play out as we go forward from here?
Well, we do see that it's not a bad idea to follow scientific advice. And it's a good thing to accept realities and not have wishful thinking. And accepting that climate change is a real threat, and it's growing, it's exponentially, it's getting worse. So in that sense, again, I'm always the more optimistic one, but I really hope that we get it. Look, there was a pandemic, there was a crisis. Some countries reacted quicker than others, and same with climate change. We must react quickly. And in that sense, coming back to the line of thought I had earlier, there is an opportunity. This whole issue of digitalization, port call optimization, this definitely brings up, also to spend less carbon. Port call optimization, particularly data exchange. I know with Gene, we were in some initiatives with the ITF on how can we best share data for these type of issues. The currently extremely low oil price should ideally also be an opportunity to think of some carbon levy, some carbon prices, some carbon markets to make sure that there's not all of a sudden the idea, I don't need to bother. No, if we still have this one more minute, I had prepared this other chart which I thought was really interesting. It's very new data, so I could click myself on the live view to the next chart, and I would now wonder if people can see this. It's about really long-term trends in fleet deployment, which combines the trend in the industry. You see that ships are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. These are the component of our liner shipping connectivity index. Data is from MDST. I hope you can see it. You click on the live view, apparently. And you see how even between first quarter and second quarter of this year, so this is the timetable, the schedules, first quarter, second quarter, 2020, you see how the average of the largest ship deploys continues to grow. Several components are stable. We have not yet seen companies leaving the market, in line with what Theo also said, that we don't see companies leaving the market. We do, however, observe that, of course, there's a reduction in TEU capacity. There's less capacity. And that's because the big shipping lines, the alliances, they can control. And I know, Peter, you had a post in Lloyd's List saying, thanks to the alliances, the shipping industry is now a little less affected, and the freight rates actually have not gone down, although demand has gone down. So from the liner's perspective, that's probably a good thing. From the port's perspective, I think what we see in this chart here is not really good news. Ships getting bigger and bigger and bigger without proportional additional volume doesn't really help the ports. You need to dredge deeper, have bigger cranes, bigger whatever, without additional demand, just more peak demand. So that's trying to combine these things, the technologies, the market concentration, and how the industry is organized. Very challenging, interesting, and we will continue to observe this. And I'm pretty sure that this blue line there with the TU capacity will certainly go down. We have already seen, of course, the blank sailings. We have seen slightly fewer blank sailings in the second quarter than the first quarter, but that doesn't mean that things are getting better. It's simply that the deployment, the schedules have adjusted.
Yep. No, indeed, Jan. Thank you.
Looking at the watch also.
Yep. No. We're getting close to the end. I just wanted to revisit this question of technology, which I think is very, very important because this is really a moment when seaports around the world have an opportunity to take a very, very close look at how technology can drive their business and their activities going forward. And I know, Gene, that technology has been a big area of focus for you, and at the Port of Los Angeles. And you've done some really market-leading things in trying to create data, create visibility, and essentially use technology to drive operational efficiency, to ensure and improve the flow of cargo through the largest port in the Western Hemisphere. I mean, just very quickly, Gene, what does the future look like for ports in terms of technology from your vantage point?
This port. Oh, shoot. We unmuted? Yeah. Okay, we have to accelerate technology. We've been working on this port community system, the only one in the United States, for about 4 years now, and I have called on the federal government to adopt a nationwide port community system. We've learned so much from our colleagues in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East that it's time to enable that technology here now. But one thing I am convinced of, because we spent the time and expertise and the study to implement our system here, it allowed us to invent and plug in what I now call the medical port optimizer, which has allowed us, Peter, to save lives. We have the ability to see product before it gets into a normal pipeline, speed it through our port and our LAX airport, and bring that product directly to the frontline hospitals. It has been a difference maker, and we need to have ports in the U.S. adopt this method, because if we're going to reemerge as an economy, data is going to drive us and our companies toward that success. And the more we can learn from our colleagues in other parts of the world and adopt, bring back here to the U.S., the better off our supply chain community will be on a global basis.
Yeah, no, good, Gene. I mean, I think that's really important. And I just mentioned the question about technology, because I think we're definitely going to be seeing more of that. I mean, if we were to look at the question of decarbonization, Theo, from your perspective, and Gene, very quickly, where do you see decarbonization going? Is there greater momentum for it now than there was? Is there greater possibility for genuine progress in hitting, for example, the IMO goals? But also, as we know, for ports who are not covered by the IMO goals to be playing their part in decarbonizing the world and international supply chains.
I think there are no excuses possible. I mean, even COVID-19 cannot be an excuse to say we are going to slow down on the implementation of any green shipping deals or green shipping targets. Also, ports have to move forward. And I think very important will be on how you can give additional incentives to companies, to ports, to further engage in this process. One of the things that's been talked about a lot, that we see that, for example, in the airline industry, is that any bailout or financial help will be linked to certain performance criteria, so that governments are only going to step in if these airlines are going to follow certain rules, or at least show some efforts. And I think overall there should be also some kind of pact or some kind of agreement among industry leaders that this part of the spectrum cannot be left behind, that despite all the difficulties many companies are facing right now, and many ports are facing, shipping lines are facing, that you have to have this clear pact. We are in this together, and we have to make sure that we continue on the path we have set out years ago already. So I think that this should be made very clear. And I hope also that a lot of industry organizations will pick up on that thought, and will also not only make big declarations about this, but also clearly facilitate further implementation of all measures that are needed in order to reach those targets, decarbonization targets.
Great, Theo. Thank you so much. This is, as usual with any good panel, you can go on, and we could have done that. There are so many topics that we could have gotten into, but I hope that we were able to give a good overview of where we're at now in terms of the seaports world and where we're going from here. So I want to thank you all who joined us today for attending today's webcast, Business as Unusual, Adopting Port Business Models to Survive and Thrive in the Post-COVID-19 Era, produced by the International Association of Ports and Harbors and the Maritime and Trade Division of IHS Markit in cooperation with the Port of Antwerp. A few things. Thank you all for who submitted questions. We will share the questions with the speakers. They will be able to see your questions, and I don't know whether we'll be able to respond to them, but we might be able to. Please take a moment to complete our survey. This is a new media where we're doing webcasts with video. This is somewhat new for us. We really value your feedback, and we'll continue to use what you say to continue improving programs like this one. I would like to echo what Patrick Verhoeven said earlier to invite you to join us for the next webinar of the World Ports Conference COVID-19 series on June 10th, focused on improving ship-to-shore relations in the post-COVID-19 era. And so I would like to then also say, just one other thought, is that we have a very exciting lineup of speakers for upcoming webcasts. Kitak Lim, the Secretary General of the IMO, Guy Platten, the Secretary General of the International Chamber of Shipping, Lee Hoon Quay, the CEO of the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore, and you can register for these events at the worldportsconference.com. So on behalf of IAPH, IHS Markit, and also the Port of Antwerp, thank you very much for attending. Thank you so much to Jean, Jan, and Theo. Really appreciate being with you today. Great fun, enjoyed it. And from myself, Peter Terschwell of IHS Markit, I hope you all have a great day, and thank you once again for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye. All the best.